16 through 33. Then the men set out from there, and they looked toward Sodom, and Abraham went with them to set them on their way. The Lord said, "Shall I hide from Abraham what I am about to do, seeing that Abraham shall become a great and mighty nation, and all the nations of the earth shall be blessed in him? No, for I have chosen him, that he may charge his children and his household after him to keep the way of the Lord by doing righteousness and justice, so that the Lord may bring about for Abraham what he has promised him." Then the Lord said, "How great is the outcry against Sodom and Gomorrah, and how very grave their sin! I must go down and see whether they have done altogether according to the outcry that has come to me, and if not, I will know." So the men turned from there and went toward Sodom, while Abraham remained standing before the Lord. Then Abraham came near and said, "Will you indeed sweep away the righteous with the wicked? Suppose there are 50 righteous within the city. Will you then sweep away the place and not forgive it for the 50 righteous who are in it? Far be it from you to do such a thing, to slay the righteous with the wicked, so that the righteous fare as the wicked. Far be that from you. Shall not the judge of all the earth do what is just?" And the Lord said, "If I find at Sodom 50 righteous in the city, I will forgive the whole place for their sake." Abraham answered, "Let me take it upon myself to speak to the Lord, I who am but dust and ashes. Suppose 5 of the 50 righteous are lacking. Will you destroy the whole city for lack of 5? And he said, "I will not destroy it if I find 45 there." Again he spoke to him, "Suppose 40 are found there." He answered, "For the sake of 40, I will not do it." And then he said, "Oh, do not let the Lord be angry if I speak. Suppose 30 are found there." He answered, "I will not do it if I find 30 there." He said, "Let me take it upon myself to speak to the Lord. Suppose 20 are found there." He answered, "For the sake of 20, I will not destroy it." Then he said, "Oh, do not let the Lord be angry if I speak just once more." "Suppose 10 are found there." He answered, "For the sake of 10, I will not destroy it." And the Lord went his way, when he had finished speaking to Abraham, and Abraham returned to his place.
Thank you, Cindy. The church lady would not have been happy. Not happy at all with that conversation between God and Abraham. This year marks the 50th anniversary of the late night show Saturday Night Live. 50 years. 50 years. A show which over those 50 years has combined celebrity hosts and comedic sketches and satirical news and musical guests and all kinds of crazy stuff to entertain us over well over 900 episodes now, making it one of the longest running TV shows in history. And over the course of those 50 years and well over 900 episodes, the cast members of Saturday Night Live have created some of the most beloved and popular fictional characters in all of comedy. Like, for instance, the Conehead family, the aliens, played by Dan Aykroyd and Jane Curtin and Lorraine Newman. Debbie Downer, Rachel Dratch's Debbie Downer, who was able to find the cloud in every silver lining. Bill Murray's Nick the Lounge Singer, who for some reason used to love to sing about Star Wars. Kate McKinnon's unhinged multiple alien abductee Colleen Farrell. Al Franken's Stuart Smalley, the self-pronounced self-help guru who eventually, during his appearances, would look into a mirror and say, "You're good enough, you're smart enough, and doggone it, people like you." Mike Myers, Jewish mother talk show host Linda Richman, always gracious, kind, gentle, but who would introduce segments to her audience by saying things like, "Grape nuts have neither grapes nor nuts in them. Discuss." And then Dana Carvey's church lady. Dana Carvey's church lady. Another talk show host. Another talk host who, just like Myers' Linda Richman, would start out her interviews, often with celebrities, gentle and kind and gracious, but who would inevitably slide into being deeply sarcastic and degrading and demeaning and condemning of all of her celebrity interviewees, condemning them for their sinful ways, calling down the fires of God's destruction on them. And then, often the church lady would end with her superior dance, which looks something like this. No. The church lady would have hated the conversation between God and Abraham that Cindy just shared with us from the book of Genesis. Prior to that conversation, just before that conversation, the writer of the book of Genesis tells us that God sends messengers, angel messengers in the form of men, to visit a couple named Abraham and Sarah. Visit them to deliver a message, to tell them that after decades of waiting, and after reaching the point where they thought it was no longer possible, Sarah was going to deliver a child. The long-awaited son that Abraham and Sarah had hoped for and that God had long before promised them. But the angel messenger men's job isn't done yet. God's got one more assignment for them. God sends the angel messenger men to a city called Sodom, which is believed to have been in what is now Jordan. God sends the angel messenger men to Sodom on a reconnaissance mission to see if the reports are true. The reports that Sodom has become a completely inhospitable place, an inhospitable society. A place, a city, a society characterized by violence, neglect of the poor and needy, and hostility towards those who are different. The Hebrew word is ger, which translates in English as stranger. A place characterized by those things. And if the reports are true, that Sodom has indeed become that inhospitable a place, well, it's likely not going to end well for it. The writer doesn't give us the part of the conversation where God lets Abraham know what's going down. Okay? All we're told is that after the angel messenger men are finished with Abraham and Sarah, Abraham walks them to the road that leads to Sodom. Again, a common act of hospitality in the ancient world. Just one of many acts of hospitality that Abraham and Sarah offered the angel messenger men visitors. Abraham walks them to the road. They head on their way to Sodom. And then we are told that God, who it seems has been watching all of this, is left alone with Abraham. And again, the writer doesn't give us the part of the conversation where God lets Abraham in on what's going on, but Abraham clearly knows. Because when Abraham finally starts to speak to God, it is as the original host of another long-running TV show, Let's Make a Deal. Abraham enters into a negotiation with God. A reverse 5-year-old conversation. Because you know how kids negotiate, right? They negotiate up. Just 10 more minutes of TV, please. Just 10 more M&Ms, and I won't ask for any more. Just 10 more swings, pushes on the swing set, and we can go home. And then, of course, if you say yes, then they try to get 10 up to 20 and up to 30, and so on. Okay? Well, Abraham negotiates down. Abraham becomes aware of what is going on and what might happen to Sodom, and says to God, hey God? Yes, Abe. I get all that about Sodom and being so inhospitable and all that, but I was just wondering, if the angel messenger men find, let's say 50 cool people in Sodom, 50 people who reject those inhospitable ways and instead are committed to your ways, your hospitable ways of rejecting violence, rejecting neglect of the poor and needy, rejecting hostility and mistreatment of those who are different. If 50 cool people can be found in Sodom, well, will you still sweep away everybody? I mean, come on, God. That's not really you, is it? That's not you. And besides, what would the neighbors think? What would the other nations think? God says to Abraham, yeah, you got a point. All right, if 50 cool people can be found in Sodom, I won't sweep away any of them. And that is all that Abraham, the master negotiator, needs for an opening. He says, well, yeah, but think about this, God. What if they're just like a little bit short? Maybe 45? Would that do? God says, yeah, fine, Abe, that will do. And again, like a reverse child, Abraham keeps going, gets God down to 40, down to 30, down to 20, down to 10, and then, well, there is no then. Then the negotiation stops. It stops. God and Abraham go on their way. Why does it stop at 10? Well, because throughout the biblical literature, 10 is one of those numbers, those symbolic numbers, that regularly represents things like wholeness, completeness, enough. Or to put that in the language of modern day physics, business, social science, it represents critical mass. It represents critical mass. The minimum amount of something, and sometimes a very small amount. The minimum amount of something needed to help change or transform a system. Whether that system is a relationship, company, community, society, or nation. Abraham seems to understand. He seems to understand that all it takes, with God's help, is a critical mass, even a small critical mass of people who are willing to reject Sodom's inhospitable ways to change that place, to transform it, to save it from destruction. But not at God's hand, their own. See, many people see in this story and others like it. And there was a strain of ancient Jewish theology which saw this story as representative of a God who not just actively seeks, but almost seems to relish the idea of destroying those who reject God's ways. But there was also a strain of ancient Jewish theology, and many theologians in our time who see in this story something different. They see in this story, and others like it, a representation of the inevitable consequences of our rejecting God's ways, choosing inhospitable ways instead of God's hospitable ones. And when that happens, relationships, communities, organizations, societies can self-destruct. Not because it's what God wants, but because God has given us the gift of free will. It is our choice to make, whether to choose God's ways or the ways of places that are inhospitable. Abraham seems to understand this. He seems to understand both the power of a critical mass and also believe that that critical mass can make a difference. Believe that Sodom can be changed, transformed. Which is why I think that as God went on God's way after that conversation, God was smiling. God was smiling. And instead of a superior dance, maybe doing a little happy dance. I don't have one of those for you. You're going to have to figure that out on your own. I think God left that conversation smiling, left that conversation happy. As much as Church Lady would have hated it, God loved it. God left that conversation happy, so happy with Abraham. Because Abraham responded the way that God had hoped. See, the writer of Genesis doesn't give us the part of the conversation where God lets Abraham in on what's happening, but the writer does give us another conversation. The one that God has with God's self. Before God has the conversation with Abraham, God has an internal dialogue going on. God asks God's self, should I tell him? Should I tell him this? And then God says, shall I hide it from him, actually? And then God says, no. No, I shouldn't hide this from Abraham. And I shouldn't hide it from him because I've chosen him. I have chosen him to lead his people to reject the inhospitable ways of Sodom and instead be committed to my ways, my hospitable ways. So I wonder then, if God didn't tell Abraham because he wanted to see how Abraham would respond. Because God wanted to see whether Abraham would respond by saying, like church lady, yeah, go for it, burn it. Or whether Abraham maybe would respond with resignation. Just throw up his hands and say, looks hopeless to me. Not anything I can do about it, so whatever. Or whether Abraham would respond by demonstrating his belief that Sodom could change, that it could become a more hospitable place, and by expressing his belief that just a small critical mass of people within Sodom, with God's help, could make that happen. My guess is God was pretty happy with Abraham for that response, but would end up deeply saddened over Sodom, because that critical mass would not be found. Wouldn't be found. After this scene, the writer tells us that the angel messenger men arrive in Sodom, and not long after, as they are staying in the house of Abraham's nephew Lot, all the men of Sodom storm the house, demand that the angel messenger men be brought out so that the men of Sodom could know them. In that occasion, a biblical euphemism for have sex with them. And while the story has often been understood as a condemnation of homosexuality, it is not. It is not. For one thing, the phrase, all the men of Sodom, in the Hebrew that Genesis is originally written in, that phrase likely more accurately translates as all the people of Sodom, men and women alike. And at the same time, if it was about a condemnation of homosexuality, why does Lot offer his daughters as a replacement for the angel messenger men? No, that's not. It is not a story condemning homosexuality. What it is a story condemning violence. In this case, sexual violence. Add that on top of Sodom's biblical reputation for its neglect of the poor and needy and its hostility towards those who were different, and you get the inhospitable place that Sodom was. And its refusal to turn from those ways would eventually destroy it. Nir Isakovitz is a professor of philosophy and the founding director of the Applied Ethics Center at the University of Massachusetts at Boston. And Isakovitz has said recently that in his view, he believes that over time we have become a more and more inhospitable place. An inhospitable society. A society which seems to more and more, at best, become resigned to violence, if not advocate for it at times. A society which more and more seems to be okay with neglecting the poor and needy. A society which more and more seems to be okay with hostility towards those who are different. And given that, Isakovitz says that what worries him is that he is starting to think that the best we can hope for is to simply tolerate each other. To just tolerate each other. Or, as he puts it a little bit more starkly, the best we can hope for is to simply be in each other's presence without dying. Dying physically, emotionally, socially, spiritually. If Isakovitz is right, and there are times, I have to admit, when it's a little bit harder than others to argue against that for me, what does that mean? What does it mean for us in the Christian spiritual community? What it means for us, I think, is that now as much as ever, God is looking for Abrahams and tens. Now as much as ever, God is looking for us to be Abrahams, to be people who genuinely believe that change and transformation are possible, who genuinely believe that with God's help, even a small critical mass can help make that change, help make that transformation little by little, day by day. It means that God is also looking for us to be tens, to be a part of that critical mass. It means that God is looking for us to be Abrahams and tens and not church ladies. It means that God is looking for us to reject the superior dance and instead